So our first chapter in Zin this week is chapter 18, The Impossible Victory, Vietnam. Um, as you're reading through this chapter, I want you to be keeping a few things in mind. What were the causes of the Vietnam War? You know, there's the multiple different types of causes that have to do with communism, with kind of spread of socialist ideas. The United States is kind of locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. And so anything that is even slightly socialist is perceived as kind of a threat to the United States. And you know, that's in part the United States being a largely capitalist nation, although we have never been completely capitalist. I mean, we've always had various, you know, public programs. I mean, public education, you know, public schools, and our postal service. We've never been a completely free market nation, but we always have leaned a bit more capitalist. At different times, that capitalism kind of capitalist ideas have been challenged a bit more. We'll see some of that later in the semester when we're talking about labor movements and things, especially around the early 20th century. There is a rise in kind of socialist ideas in the United States, as a lot of people felt that industrialization and capitalism were, you know, were kind of failing, weren't giving people what they wanted. Um, but anyway, in this context, there is this real kind of concern with Vietnam, formerly French Indochina, a French colony. And the Vietnamese people wanted their independence. They wanted to be able to do what they wanted. And Ho Chi Minh, who was kind of the leader there, he had these more kind of communist beliefs, and he and his beliefs were very much supported by the people of Vietnam. That's what they wanted to do. That's the direction they wanted to take their country. And the United States stepped in and said, no, you know, we know better. You can see a lot of kind of the echoes of the Philippines conflict, in which we said the Filipino people couldn't possibly govern themselves. And here we're saying the Vietnamese people don't really know what they want, and we will impose upon them what we believe is right, which ends up being a huge, massive war and a huge, you know, death toll um, that involves, how many tons of bombs? Um, 7 million tons of bombs dropped on Vietnam, more than twice the total bombs dropped on Europe and Asia in World War II. A 500-pound bomb for every human being in Vietnam. That's a lot of bombs. Right? That is a lot of firepower being dropped on this one very small, you know, relatively small little country. Um, you know, in addition to the worries about communism spreading, and if Vietnam ended up being a kind of successful communist or socialist nation, what kind of impact that might have on the United States as kind of a challenge to capitalism. There is also all of the natural resources, coal and tin and lumber and other minerals, and all of that stuff in Vietnam that could be used to enrich American businesses. So there is very much a degree of kind of greed in wanting those resources. I mean, as well as the idea that, you know, capitalism tends to be a very more individualistic kind of project, right? It is kind of acquiring capital for yourself. And whereas, you know, socialism is more about the social kind of, you know, group, and at least hopefully in theory, everyone benefiting. Um, so the war in Vietnam, I think, in a lot of different ways, we can see as this kind of war for greed. You'll see about how the Vietnam War, one of the things that helped push the United States into the war is the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Um, it's kind of interesting to me how many of these incidents have to do with boats, right? I mean, there's the USS Maine, there's a Lusitania, then there's the attack on Pearl Harbor, lots of things with ships being sank, and then those being used as like, this is why we need to go to war. And in the case of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it was completely fabricated and made up, but by the time people realized it was really all lies, we were already embroiled into this war. So be looking at the things that are pushing the country into the war, how people are being made to support the war, and then how people are opposed to the war. So who's protesting? How are they protesting? What populations of people are protesting this war because what as it was a war that really dragged on, it developed a very strong anti-war movement. And that is one of the things that really helped end the war and force the United States to withdraw and to give up and to lose. Right? I mean, it is the main kind of example of this huge superpower not being able to succeed, not being able to win. We have a somewhat similar, in some ways, situation going on over in Iraq. In our more kind of current day, we're not embroiled in that conflict nearly as much, but still, it was again supposed to be kind of a quick, easy war. Going into Iraq, we'd be greeted as liberators, and things still aren't completely settled there. Um, so just be thinking about how we get involved in this war and then how we get out of this war. And is this an example of American empire?